Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. Just about after 6 months of this government, is all the criticism on it justified? Is the criticism on the CM Punjab, Bazdar Sahab justified at this point? Shouldn't the government be allowed to function? Shouldn't there be legislation in the parliament? We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the constant squabbling between the government and the opposition, which has resulted into almost no legislation in the parliament. The primary function of the parliament is to legislate, and we've seen very little of that. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about the 18th Amendment, which raises its head again, where there's talk about the government says it does not plan to do anything about it. On the other hand, PPP raises the issue of the 18th Amendment again and again. Why? Let's talk about that. We'll also be talking about the accountability process, and as it continues, the effects it can have on the alliances within the government and particularly on the opposition with its interaction with the government, which is already under pressure in the sense that there is no legislation, there is constant squabbling. We'll be talking about all of that. I have with me Barrister Safiullah, who's a legal expert. Thank you for being with us today. Senator Muhammad Ali Saif, who's a senator with MQM. Thank you for joining us today. Barrister Safiullah, to start off with you, like I said, the government has just in about 6 months, and then yet there is all of this criticism on it by the media, by the opposition, at times by its own allies also. Do you think that this kind of criticism is justified? Shouldn't we wait for this government to give out its policies, to see their effect before this kind of criticism is leveled against it?
I absolutely agree with you, Maruf. I think that the government is being criticized a little too much because I feel that partly it's the government's own fault because the government had given the people such high hopes. There was a whole dream that the government had built about changing Pakistan, flipping it entirely over within 100 days. And so it's perhaps even less than that in certain speeches and in mass addresses to the media.
But isn't that part of the whole electoral process?
Absolutely, I agree that in Pakistan's budding democracy, Pakistan does not really realize as yet that sometimes statements that are made to the public are not necessarily statements that are carried out in the parliament. And so the people are, of course, going through this learning curve as much as the government is. And I do think that the government within 6 months obviously does not have any tools at its behest to completely revamp Pakistan. It's going to take substantial time. But regardless, there is, of course, a certain degree of the blame that the government has to carry for having made people feel so hopeful in the first place. And so that's just the first issue. The second issue is the issue of the policies that the government is pursuing at the moment. And we see that the government is clearly stumbling in many ways. The government clearly does not know many of the things that it ought to know. For instance, we have seen with the coming of the recent mini budgets, time and again, we have seen contradictory matters taking place. We have seen them removing taxes on filers, we have seen them imposing taxes on filers, and then in the next mini budget, once again, reimposing those taxes. We have seen tremendous inflation, we have seen depreciation of the rupee, we have seen the stock market being completely floored out.
But to be fair, and I will go to Muhammad Ali Saif, Senator Muhammad Ali Saif on that. Senator Saab, do you think that to be fair, it's still part of the government growing pains? They're trying to find their feet, they're trying to find the right policies to float at this stage. Don't you think that's true, considering that they keep on saying, and to an extent we might all agree that the kind of situation that they found themselves in, they needed to find time to adjust themselves?
Well, I personally believe that politics is a very cruel game.
Right.
There are no sympathies for anybody in politics.
Right.
And so far as the government is concerned, I think, and the criticism is very much part and parcel of politics. This is what politics is all about.
Right.
You attack, you get a counter attack, you blame, you get a counter blame, you accuse, you get a counter accusation. So this is how the whole game works. Number one.
But don't you think this is unprecedented, the kind of criticism that has been leveled against this government? According to Barrister Saab, it's because of the hopes associated with it.
I believe that every government that comes into power brings or raises the hopes of people, of
Right.
its supporters and general public. There are always three parties in a political conflict.
Right.
Your supporters, your opponents, and the neutral lot. And whenever a party wins an election and comes into power, it has the sympathies of its supporters as well as the general public. It
Right.
looks at up to that party and up to that ruler to fulfill its his and her promises or the party's promises. Well, what happens is that this government is no exception. This is exactly what happened. Now, I believe that kind of behaving in such a way as if this criticism is unjustified or justified, let's not get into that discussion, and the government should not. It should take it in a healthy and in a positive way, and focus its attention on solving and resolving the problems. Right? There are hundreds of problems at its table, lying at its table. Instead of focusing on criticism, let's and
But
then
how can they
counter-criticize
resolve?
them.
I mean, how can they resolve problems? I mean, if you look at the CM Punjab, for example, Bazdar Sahab, I mean, he's been there for how long? A couple of months, and he's doing his duties. You know, whatever duties there are,
Yeah.
he's made according to the reports. There are some moves that he's made that are quite welcome, and we won't know until a little. We won't know as soon as this time in the time span that we've seen him whether he is actually doing well as the CM of Punjab or not until we give him that chance. So the kind
You see, governance itself and running the state is not a game of magic, right?
Right.
That you show a new trick every time and people
Right.
just enjoy it. When you step into the government and when you take over the reins of power, you're supposed to, and it's like by default you're supposed to know everything and you're supposed to run. You can't just sit there and then say, oh, I'm new and give me some time. As he said, that I'm still under training and I'll learn God knows when. So this is no excuse in politics, number one. Number two, you're supposed to be if I just claim here that I'm the leader of this nation and the nation must believe in me and vote me into power, then it's a like the argument is that it is presupposed that I know my game and I know how to play it. I'm not supposed to be then sitting on the seat of power and then saying, oh, I'm trying to learn how economy works, oh, how administration works, how the constitution works. No, you're supposed to be well acquainted with everything and
But what
experienced.
about all the squabbling that's happening between the government and the opposition? To an extent, I would say again unprecedented, that there is no legislation.
The lack of legislation or absence of legislation is because of certain parliamentary disputes, and specifically in the National Assembly on the fact that there were no committees formed because of the tussle between the government on the issue of appointment of Mia Shahbaz Sharif as the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. Now that issue has been resolved, committees have been constituted, and I believe work will start, the laws will start rolling. But another issue that is important is that Senate is also part of Parliament, and Senate has been doing its work. We have been, legislation is being tabled in the Senate, it has been debated, it has been passed or rejected. Even today we had argument over certain amendments in the election laws, and also amendments in the PMDC, Pakistan Medical and Dental Council's laws. So,
But certain bills will only come to you after they've been debated in the first house.
no, it's a two-way process. Some bills can originate in the Senate and then go to the National Assembly, and the debate process is okay. But then the committees have to discuss it in detail and then put forward recommendations to the government. That's also constitutional process of enactments of legislation. The issue is that I personally think that when you are in power, like it's just like driving a car. You are my colleagues, and we all sit in the car, and I volunteer to drive.
Right.
Then I'm supposed to be, and if you let me, then I'm supposed to be knowing how to drive, right? I cannot say that, oh, I don't know how to shift the gear once the car is on the road. It's so let's
Right. I will come back to you. We've also been joined by Rehman Azhar Saab, who's a senior journalist. Thank you for joining us. Rehman Saab, according to Senator Saab, there is, the government should know how to steer the government, which is fair enough, but the government should also know what its policies are and how to float its policies. It shouldn't, take umbrage under slogans like it doesn't know, it's finding its feet, all of that. Do you think that's true? Don't you think that the little time that it has had, we can't judge the new government yet. We need to give it the time that it needs to actually bring the change, you know, the slogan of change that we keep talking about, the slogan of change which PTI spoke about, the reason why it came into power. It needs time to bring about that kind of change.
Right, thank you for having me on the show. I think I've listened to some of the comments by Senator Saab, and I'll agree to an extent that there has been a lack of homework on part of government. It seems that they were not prepared to take charge of government, and this is what we have seen in previous 4 to 5 months. As far as economic situation is concerned, some of the decisions made by the government, and especially the second budget, seems like they've been running the affairs as gauging reactions and then taking steps. So this should not have been the case. You might remember then when Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, since we are talking about the homework before they were ready or not to take the government. You might remember the event where they announced their 100-day plan. Now, we listened to the presentations on defense by Dr. Shiri Mazari. Then Jahangir Tareen was there, who briefed media and others on agricultural reforms. Shah Mahmood Qureshi was the one briefing about administrative reforms. Parvez Khattak was talking about, and he gave a briefing about social reforms agenda. And then Asad Umar was the only one who briefed on economy. So out of these 5 areas, I think Asad Umar is the only one who has been appointed, as PTI thought that he is going to be the Minister for Economy. Right. Dr. Shiri Mazari from Defense, she went to Human Rights. Parvez Khattak Saab from Social Reforms, he went to Defense Ministry. Right. Then Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Administrative Reforms and a separate province. He happens to be the Foreign Minister. And then Jahangir Tareen, who briefed us on agricultural reforms, he was disqualified. Yeah. So in short, the homework of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf was not there, and that's why what we have seen in past 4 or 5 months, that there has been knee-jerk reactions from government. It seems like they wake up in the morning and then they decide what to do now. So this has been the pattern of government, which is, I believe, they have paid a price for that too.
What about, I mean, let's talk about, you spoke about the foreign ministry, for example, you know, Shah Mahmood Qureshi. So we've seen some very welcome changes as far as on the foreign policy front. Isn't that true, Safiullah sir?
I do believe that the foreign policy has definitely improved quite a bit. I feel that for the first time, Pakistan is actually taking a lot of pride in being Pakistani. I just read recently that Pakistan is going to be having a fundraising in South Africa. And so for the first time I've heard of Pakistan doing something in Africa. Right. Not just that, we also have news of, for instance, Mohammed bin Salman coming to Pakistan with $12 billion. Right. There's already a huge success that we have in terms of the money that we have received from, not just Saudi Arabia, but also from the UAE. We also have had at least a degree of success with China, with Malaysia. Right. And so, of course, that's something that we expected from Imran Khan. That's one of the primary reasons why people wanted Imran Khan to come about, because Imran Khan was already an international personality. Right. He was somebody who was recognized, and perhaps the most recognized Pakistani the world over, and he had a fan following because of his cricket, because of his social personality, because of his philanthropy. And so the improved foreign policy, of course, Imran Khan and Shah Mahmood Qureshi also gets a huge credit for that. So perhaps we need to give credit where it's due as far as the government's performance is concerned, where the areas in which it's doing better than the others. Absolutely. There have been areas of improvement. There has been, we have seen our corruption perception index improve slightly. We have seen our human development index improve slightly. We have seen slight changes towards the positive side. Right. However, those slight changes are only slight. The fact of the matter here is that the Pakistani public perhaps was expecting a lot more than just this. Right. And so we have, for instance, a lot of people who have been tracking down the promises that PTI has made. Right. And of the perhaps dozens of promises, I personally do not know of a single promise that has actually been carried out. And there were time-bound promises that were to be accomplished within 100 days. I'll give you a primary example. Now, this is something that I feel is something that is the biggest test of PTI that has come about just right now, which is the creation of a southern Punjab province. Right. Now, the PTI had, when it had a merger with the Janubi Punjab Suba movement, right, made a promise to the people of southern Punjab, all of them, that they will create a province within 100 days. And that was the exact term on which they received about 7 MNAs and about 30 MPAs. And this is what led to the stellar victory in Pakistan. their strongest, their area of forte was southern Punjab. That's where they got the maximum votes from, which is why they were able to make the government in the first place. And so to those people, the MNAs of PTI and the MPAs of PTI and Imran Khan himself on multiple visits consistently promised a separate province. And so you've just spoken about a lack of legislation. And so here we have the grand test. So we have PTI and its time-bound, honored promise to create a province. PMLN has already floated the bill for the creation of a new province. We just now need to see if PTI is going to go ahead with it. PTI has the numbers in the parliament and it has the numbers in the provincial parliament of Punjab as well. And it's not just that. We also have People's Party supporting this bill. The bill, like I said, has already been has been
So the
floated by
government
PM
can't
and
say
Nawaz.
that it doesn't have,
There is
have
absolutely
the kind
yes.
of
numbers. They cannot
exactly, it doesn't
argue
have
that
the
they do not
numbers, it
have the
doesn't-
numbers. This is
It
the
doesn't have
perfect
the kind of
test.
support it needs in Parliament. Gee,
Absolutely.
Senator Saab, what are the problems with the creation of the province if the government does indeed have the numbers, which it seems to?
Well, I don't see any problem if there is a will to have a separate province, which is basically a demand of Pakistani public all along, and not just Punjab, but there are demands for division of other provinces on
We're talking about the southern.
on administrative basis. Yes, southern Punjab is one such demand, but there are I believe there are certain doubts that are being expressed by various political segments or political parties.
Do you think the government just
to
hasn't gotten down to it? What are the hitches? What's the
I
problem?
don't think they are seriously considering it at the moment because the bill was had they been considering it, they would have been the ones initiating
Floating
the
the
bill.
bill, yes.
It's the PMLN, and PMLN is trying to bring them into a kind of a situation where they can play politics on it and counter their initiative basically, and they have succeeded in countering the PTI's initiative. Rather than PTI presenting the bill, it's the PMLN which has done that.
Right.
So basically politics is all about, you know, don't one must not how should I put it, is that one must not see something happening and then deduce, you know, that it's this policy or that policy. It's usually
It should
a
come
trick
out,
game
right,
as well. So number one. Number two, the issue regarding number of votes in Provincial Assembly of Punjab. Well, I think if all the parties get united, there should be
There
no problem.
shouldn't be, right.
However, there is a dispute, and that has emerged whether Bahawalpur should be a separate province or part of South Punjab, because there is a very powerful lobby which is actually lobbying for Bahawalpur to be declared as a separate province. So now that is something that depends on PTI's stewardship to manage it. I don't know how serious they are at this moment about that. Number two, because they were facing problems with the government, even with with their allies.
Right.
PMLQ is not happy with them, and God forbids, if they leave the government, then PTI is gone in Punjab.
Maybe
So-
a part of the problem is the fact that they don't have the kind of the numbers they would
Yeah,
like at this
yeah,
point. So
yeah.
they really need all of these, you know, governments. They need the opposition. They need
So
their allies. So
that is
so they're
exactly
in a- right.
exactly my argument, that instead of creating opposition and instead of criticizing in the way some of the ministers are ridiculing and really, you know, criticizing political opposition and creating more opposition, generating more hatred against them, they should play the game according to the game of politics, not create opposition but minimize opposition. But so far it seems that, you know, their policies are very aggressive, and the governments both in the provinces as well as in the center is playing the aggressive card rather than the passive card.
Gee, Rahman Sahab, do you think that they're being maybe the government is being a tad too aggressive in answering the opposition back? Perhaps, you know, the opposition is going to be the opposition. That's their job.
Well, they are, I think, and when it comes to playing politics, especially inside the parliament, you will always see these fiery speeches from opposition benches, and treasury benches are normally the ones who respond with cool and calm, and then they try to get their work done. So that should be the priority of the government. But it seems that Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, the kind of opposition that they have done, the expectations of their vote bank is also of the sort that they cannot afford to be lenient towards opposition benches. If there is a shot being fired from opposition benches, then they feel obligated that they have to respond, because that's the kind of opposition that they have done for past 5 years, and they themselves have placed even though they are in government, but they find it difficult because government is divided on how to take matters inside the parliament. There's nothing happening outside the parliament. There are no elections coming up.
Right.
We heard that local bodies might happen, but that's not happening anytime soon. So whatever politics that we are discussing, that's inside the parliament.
government.
So inside the parliament, there are two camps within the government. Treasury benches are divided as well, whether to respond with cool and calm or to take opposition on. And frankly, all it takes is one individual, one speech to take opposition on, and
ignite
that
the
just to
opposition.
ignite the opposition,
Right.
and that is what gets highlighted. So we go to the parliament session, we hear 10 speeches. They're very cool and calm, and no one notices what government is saying in those speeches. But then there is
And
one
there's that
speech,
one speech that's inflammatory
that's
and-
inflammatory,
and
and
there's
then
the
everybody
reaction to that.
goes ballistic. So I wanted to use the word kaboom. So, but that's what's been happening inside the parliament. So I think treasury benches, even they are divided on how to take it forward. And I think that's where Prime Minister, the role of leader of the house is very, very crucial. Whenever Prime Minister is in the house, we have seen attendance improving. We have seen ministers sitting in the parliament, in the house, and although there has been some ruckus in parliament, but then again,
I wanted to come
the
to that.
presence of leader of the house makes a lot of difference.
But there
And I
hasn't been
think
the kind of
Prime
decorum
Minister-
that there should have been, even
No.
with the leader of the house.
My point is that Prime Minister should take lead. Prime Minister should decide whether to take opposition on or to play it cool with the opposition. Since treasury benches are divided,
Right.
then they are following their own lines. There is a group of ministers who follows their own line of action, and then there are other ministers who follow their own line of action. They have a very different thinking on that. Prime Minister should intervene, and Prime Minister should decide what to do with the opposition and how to run the house. Only then you will see one approach, one single approach from treasury bench.
Right. Moving on, Barrister Saab, in your opinion, how do you see, let's talk about, we've been talking about, politicizing issues. Let's talk about the 18th Amendment. The government has said that they have no plans to actually meddle with the amendment. They don't want to rescind it, they don't want to repeal it, but the issue keeps on is being raised again and again by the People's Party. We've seen the comments of Bilawal Bhutto. We've seen how it keeps cropping up. Why? Do you think that it's because of just plain politics, or there's more to it?
It's simply something that they're using to distract the people from what the reality of their cases are. There are tons of fake account cases. That is what the real highlight of Pakistan should be. The fact that 36 billion rupees have been laundered out of Pakistan. And so when you want to sort of try and make sure that you don't want that on the front page, you don't want that as the headline,
Right.
you want to further politicize the issue by bringing up something like the 18th Amendment.
Right.
Now, I am of the view that the 18th Amendment is not writing on the wall, it's not etched in stone, it's something that could possibly be repealed if it has to be. The 18th Amendment came with about 100 different changes and amendments to the Constitution of Pakistan. Since the 18th Amendment, there have been 4 other amendments. So you could continue to have amendments. Pakistan's Constitution has gone through about 22 amendments by now.
Right.
And so it's completely different from what it was already. Bringing up the 18th Amendment is just something of a face-saving tactic to try and deviate the attention from what the real issue of Pakistan is, which is corruption, which is money laundering, which is the consistent flight of money from Pakistan, which is the fact that organizations have been involved, organizations as big as the State Bank, organizations as big as the Foreign Office.
Right.
Every single organization in Pakistan has been working in cahoots. And then, so what we had earlier was an issue of state capture. And so once this grand corruption is being exposed, obviously they're going to try and politicize it by stating that no, this is an attempt to sort of take away the powers from the provinces.
But
They're
when
going
they
to-
talk about, when the PPP, you're saying when the PPP talks about the Sindh Awam and they talk about the people of the Sindh, it's actually a tactic to avoid the accountability provision.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that this
Or
is
at least
something
delay
that
it.
something that they have done in the past very
Right.
successfully.
Right.
This is what they did once earlier when cases of corruption were opened up against Benazir, and they started using the Sindh card, and the entire sub-commission that was made to investigate Benazir's corruption was then rolled up just because of that. And so it really comes down to PTI now to try and see if it gives up on it or not. And I'll mention here that Qaid-e-Azam himself in June 1948 mentioned that Pakistan needs to stay away from the curse of provincialism. Now we've already had this curse, wherein we've managed to transfer all the interests from the federal government to the provinces without devolving it further. The 18th Amendment came about, and the 18th Amendment did away with what we had was already a more devolved form of governance, which was in the form of the Local Governance Ordinance 2001. People take a lot of pride in the 18th Amendment, and they say that the 18th Amendment did away with what a dictator had come up with.
Right.
However, they
devolution and
replaced
all.
it with something far worse, because then you had the Local Government Ordinance 1976, which was enacted by yet another dictator named Yahya. So they really did not get rid of any laws that dictators had passed. In fact, they replaced one dictatorial law with another dictatorial law. And what they did is they stopped the process of devolving the matters, the powers, all the way to the grassroots, all the way down to the district and to the union council level, which is something that ought to have been done in the first place in the interest of democracy. So the 18th Amendment, in my views, is something that retains itself firmly as a means to retain national identities of a few people, which eventually, with the passage of time, will melt away. But once again, like you said, it's just the Sindh card.
Right. Senator Saab, do you agree? Do you think that it's only because of the accountability process that it keeps getting, cropping up again and again with the PPP?
Well, my experience in politics has taught me one lesson: never be categoric and definite in your statements, because everything has a different dimension as well.
Do you think there's a different dimension to this?
I believe that it's just there are many dimensions to it. Yes. First of all, yes, there has been a discussion or a debate in Parliament and outside Parliament on the issue of 18th Amendment. But I believe that the positive side of the discussion is that it is now being considered whether 18th Amendment, the spirit of 18th Amendment, and the objectives of 18th Amendment, whether or not they have been fulfilled. Number one, that's the main question. And when you criticize that, when that is being criticized, because provinces have not delivered, in my opinion. I was part of the devolution committee of the Senate, and we conducted tours of all the provinces, met the provincial governments and their line agencies, and we discussed with them the devolution of power, and kind of evaluated whether they have benefited from that or not. And my understanding was, and that was our collective finding of the committee, that provinces do not have the capacity to actually absorb and then use those powers that have been devolved upon them.
Right.
Number one. Number two, yes, I believe with Barrister Saab that local bodies, that is a very, very important issue, because the democracy cannot function without devolving the power right at the grassroots level, and that is a local body system. Local body system is still not functional in its proper sense. Number one, Article 140A of the Constitution, I believe, is not being implemented or not being followed or observed or honored in letter and spirit. Punjab has a different law. They have made it almost impotent. The local body system and all the powers are in the hands of the provincial government. Similarly, Sindh has the same problem. KPK, I won't comment, because they have introduced a new system and people have complaints with that as well. Number one. Number two, that whenever you open corruption cases against a certain political party, of course they have to attack back.
React.
Yeah, they react. And they react by focusing on your policies. It's exactly the same argument raised by the PPP as there was another argument a few weeks ago that the PTI consistently raised the argument that the opposition is seeking NRO from us,
Right.
and we are not giving it to them, right? But there was no statement on record from any opposition leader that they're seeking an NRO.
But there
Rather,
wouldn't
an
be a
NRO
statement on record
was
anyway.
given in a way to the opposition by the appointment of Shehbaz Sharif as chairman PCP, Public Accounts Committee. I would call it an NRO.
You would call it an NRO.
I would call it an NRO because he's a man whom the Prime Minister himself said would not be appointed on this position, but later he changed his mind and he
He had to
appointed him.
appoint him.
Yeah,
But
he had to appoint him.
Rahman
Yeah.
Saab, that's a strong term that Senator Saab has used, isn't it? Isn't it? A lot of people feel that it's better politics by giving it to Shehbaz Sharif Saab. Not only is it not tradition, but also it would help perhaps the relationship between the opposition and the Parliament and the government, and also lead to the deadlock, the kind of deadlock that had emerged probably has, you know, it has helped that deadlock also.
Well, they had to give that position to Shehbaz Sharif because the business of the house, it wasn't working at all. And I think there came a point when one of the, that's what you call brinkmanship, one of them had to swerve, and
Right,
that
right.
was the government who said, okay, Shehbaz Sharif can be chairman of Public Accounts Committee. But I think the issue that we were discussing, I partially agree with what Senator Saab and Barrister Saab has said, but I think the problem here is with the approach. If you want to have any constitutional amendments or changes to any existing amendments,
Right.
18th Amendment is not a holy scripture which cannot be changed, or there cannot be laws everywhere in the world. I have a background in law. I think Indian Constitution had more than 200 amendments. Similarly, other constitutions in the world as well. Amendments, constitutional amendments, constitutions are there to adapt themselves to the what people need, and this
But
is the
for a
spirit of the law.
constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 majority. And the
You do
government-
that, but then this is not something that if you are going to talk about 18th Amendment, it's going to be blasphemous. So this should not be the approach in any society or any parliament as well. But I think the problem here with the government is its approach. In this atmosphere of hostility, political hostility, I think there cannot be any meaningful debate on any constitutional amendment. If government sincerely wants to initiate a dialogue on 18th Amendment, it cannot take place in the existing scenario or what is going on in the parliament. You were talking about the province. Same scenario. If it has to be done, like Senator Saab was saying, that there are many reservations as well. So people have questions about division of the biggest province, and if they ask that if Punjab can be divided, then why not there can be a province with Karachi and Hyderabad? Why can't there be a province of Saraiki areas in KP or Hazara in KP? Why, if the issue is reaching people coming to Lahore all the way across from Dera Ghazi Khan, then Balochistan should be, there should be 3 or 4 provinces in Balochistan as well, if the reachability is the issue. So I think the questions need to be answered, and it can only be answered if government just cools the temperature, and then they have to initiate a dialogue. They have to take other parties on board, and only then these constitutional amendments can take place. If you want to bully your way through any constitutional amendment, I don't think.
But
it's
I don't
going
think
to
they
be
have the
lasting.
numbers to
I
do
think
that anyway.
this will be detrimental for the constitution if you just rely on numbers. If you say that we have the numbers,
But they
we
don't.
can do this,
The
and
reality is
then
they
we
don't.
will do these constitutional amendments.
But Raman Saab, on the one hand, we talk about, you're saying political hostility, the atmosphere of hostility, and on the other hand, there is the accountability process, which the government is categorical in saying that they will not compromise under any condition. And every time they talk about accountability, there's a flag is raised just from Sindh, which is,
See, the
PCC
issue is
or
not just
CMLN.
accountability. You can do the accountability process can continue, but if government comes to the front and says we are going to take you to task and we are going to hold everybody accountable, and
But they're
so
saying
and
that.
so person XYZ is going to be arrested, then you are directly getting yourself involved. If Prime Minister Imran Khan would have on the first day said, look, I'm going to run the government, accountability process is the responsibility of the NAB, they will do their job, I will not influence NAB whether for anybody or against anybody, I think situation would have been very different.
But hasn't he said that?
But then you have ministers claiming that so and so is going to be arrested next week or 3 months from now, and then April or March will be the months for the sweeping of all whosoever is left. So I think those statements keep coming, and the constitutional amendments, whenever they have happened, why did constitutions of 1956 and 62 could not survive? That there wasn't consensus, majority wasn't, they did not agree on the basic principles. And 73, the constitution of 73, I believe, I might be wrong, but as far as a student of political history, I think because of the consensus, it has survived till date. The amendments have taken place. So even right now, if amendments have to take place, if you want to change the law, if you want to create provinces, if you want to change 18th Amendment, if you want to do any legislative business, you have to take other parties on board. And for that, you have to cool the temperatures down.
Right, G. Barrister Saab, I can see you've been wanting to interject.
No, not at all. In fact, I just wanted to add two things. The first thing is that as far as the creation of provinces is concerned, PTI has in fact very categorically and very clearly supported the creation of South Punjab province and also a Bahawalpur province. So PTI now stating that it does not support a South Punjab province or a Bahawalpur province is something that I'd personally be very surprised to hear.
Right.
Now, as far as the second issue is concerned, as far as that of accountability is concerned, the fact remains that, and I'll support Hamza Saab here, the fact is that PTI was not present when the 18th Amendment was passed. There was not a single person from PTI in the committee that made the 18th Amendment. I don't see why there is any reason why PTI should be bound by any previous laws within Pakistan. PTI came with a promise to change the laws.
But they can't change it again and again.
Of course, without the numbers. And so
right.
that's exactly the part that I was trying to add to,
Right.
which is the fact that if People's Party is trying to raise the issue of PTI wanting to carry out the 18th Amendment, it cannot happen without People's Party.
Exactly.
And so it's obviously a diversion from what the real issues are. And the real issues are those of accountability. The second thing that I want to add to this is the fact that even PTI is not altogether responsible for the accountability. All of this accountability, the fact that the NAB is constantly being given directions, the fact that all of these things are being taken place is by the judiciary. So if the People's Party has a problem, if PMLN has a problem, if anybody has a problem, they should take it up with the courts and not with PTI, not on the floor of the parliament.
But according to Rehman Saab, it's about, it's about all these statements that keep coming in. On the one hand, the government says it's not going to take ownership of NAB. It says that NAB is itself independent and they have nothing to do with it. Or on the other hand, there are these statements that keep coming up that seem to
They're
indicate.
taking credit for the process of
Right,
accountability. When you
right.
take credit for that you
Of
are
course,
doing
of
accountability,
course.
so of course it sends a
and-
message to the opposition
that
that
you are
this is all
responsible.
happening because of you.
I'll
But
agree
then-
with,
but
I'll
to be
agree
fair-
with Rehman Saab that this has been an ongoing problem and a criticism on PTI
Right.
for the fact that they have been speaking too much and out of order on sub judice matters.
Right.
And all of these matters are sub judice. In fact, I'd be very glad if the courts
I
were
guess
to
we-
issue any notices to members of the PTI who
Yes, I
speak up
think
on
that
these
that-
issues.
Right, but in the meantime, when it hasn't happened, and the media is also free to talk about issues that are and are not sub judice. But Senator Saab, do you think that it's true? Do you think that the government needs to, the government is in sort of in a difficult place in the sense that it wants to take, and I will take Rehman Saab's comments on this when he said that the government wants to take ownership of the accountability process because they came in with a slogan of accountability. The Prime Minister made a speech to start off with. He said that accountability is something he will not compromise on. So they want to take they take benefit of that and the whole process. But on the other hand, there is that whole independence issue that if they do that, then it looks like the government is influencing it or behind it, which may not be the case. So how do you see the situation?
Well, it's quite clear that PTI's agenda, political agenda for this election was anti-corruption.
Right.
And that's what they promised. Okay, they came into power, but so far as my knowledge goes, the only step that they have taken against corruption is the appointment of a certain advisor to the Prime Minister, and that's it. Nothing else has been done so far. All the cases that you see and are being discussed and debated in the media and between politicians and political parties, they were initiated by either the previous governments or by the Supreme Court's orders. Even JITs were established by the orders of the Supreme Court. In Asif Zardari's and Bilawal Bhutto's
Right.
money laundering investigation, there was a JIT which was actually ordered by the Supreme Court to conduct inquiry. But if you remember, there was a hearing in the Supreme Court in Lahore Registry. JIT presented its report, and immediately afterwards, within half an hour, the advisor to the Prime Minister and the information minister sat and had a press conference and took ownership of all that.
Right.
And then the next day the Supreme Court had to tell them, reprimand them and tell them, do not comment on this issue, it's an ongoing investigation. And it took away the kind of that debate out of the, from their table and stop them from discussing it. Actually, David Miliband, when he was who was the former foreign minister of
Right.
United Kingdom, he once commented on David Cameron's speeches and comments that he used to make. He said, God has given you 2 ears and 1 mouth. When you are in power, use your ears more than your mouth.
Right.
PTI's ministers and leaders are in love with this camera. Anything happens, even if there is a cloud on the sky, they just come and start discussing it.
Now with the
Right?
new regulations, they actually,
Yeah,
it seems
yeah.
that they don't like us very
Just
much.
imagine the mess that they made out of that Sahiwal
You should
incident.
see the draft bill for the media regulation.
Yeah, the Sahiwal incident. Just imagine if they had kept their mouths shut,
Yeah.
right? Things would have just properly been handled, I believe. Legally and politically, everything would have been in right order. But what they did, they just made a mess out of it. So the problem is, do not speak too much and don't take ownership of this accountability process. Okay, initiate new cases, but there is no time for that. And they had, I'm not criticizing them. I am actually trying to tell them, and I said this even in the parliament yesterday. I said the Prime Minister must not keep Interior Ministry with himself. He must appoint a full-fledged Federal Minister for Interior Affairs,
Right.
a person who well known with law enforcement. Because that way, if there is a person there, he will take away the burden from Prime Minister's shoulders and will be able to manage it. Otherwise, every case like Sahiwal incident, it will be just kind of used against the government by its own ministers
Right. Do you think
at the
why
provincial level.
hasn't there been a full-fledged?
I don't know.
Interior
This is for the
Minister?
Prime Minister to answer this.
I think
Mansa, what's
there
the
have been too many contenders for the slot. So
Yes,
I think Prime Minister thought it best to keep it with himself.
But exactly, the Prime Minister was criticizing Nawaz Sharif for keeping the foreign minister's portfolio with himself for 5 years. This is what he used to do, and now he's not appointing an interior minister. And interior ministry is very sensitive responsibility in a national security state like Pakistan.
Right.
So,
As far as, there are a lot of rumors. I just want to quickly discuss this. As far as, NRO is concerned, we spoke about it. But there are, NRO, we talk about the NRO and then, a week goes by and then the NRO raises its head again. Then, there are all these rumors about a deal. The government, of course, denies that there is a deal. The opposition says it didn't ask for one. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't believe that there is any deal that is taking place. I believe that this is something that we continue to hear. I remember that for the last 10 years when the PM Nawaz government and the People's Party government was on about, we kept
Right.
hearing about martial law coming in and we kept hearing these grapevine rumors. And so I believe that this is a similar issue. I believe that PTI at the moment is in a very comfortable place. It's comfortable because the two opposition parties against it are both embroiled in very serious legal issues,
Right.
which are not going to go away anytime soon. They are bound to pull both of these parties down, and if anything, PTI can see itself growing further. So the idea of the PTI entering into any deal is completely unnecessary. As far as the
But legally speaking, can it actually even enter into a deal? Because when it happened, there was a martial law in place, there was a dictator earlier on, and the situation now is very different.
So it's a very interesting question, and this is a legal question, and so the NRO was of course thrown away by the courts, but it did take place.
Right.
And so the question here is, can the PTI make any sort of an act which perhaps gets rid of corruption cases against other parties?
Right.
If it gets together with other political parties, it might be able to do so. The Supreme Court could probably undo it and declare it unconstitutional, declare it illegal. But the question of whether the PTI could perhaps, if it wanted to,
Theoretically, you think it can.
do it, yes, it would be able to do so,
Right.
because that's one of the basic parts of the parliament.
Right. That's so it has to happen with the support of the whole parliament if it were
Absolutely.
to happen, all the
Absolutely.
political parties, right? Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us today. Barrister Safiullah Saab, thank you for your time. Senator Muhammad Ali Saif Saab, thank you for joining us today. Rehman Aziz Saab, thank you for your time. As far as the government is concerned, there may be politics being played by political parties, but it remains true that essentially the government is new. Essentially, it is some 6 months into the government, it has come in, and it needs that kind of time to float its policies. It needs that kind of time to set the kind of path that we need for progress in Pakistan. We need to give it that time. We need to have that kind of faith in the government so that it can actually perform. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.